In the last couple of months leading up to the NFL draft, I talked a lot about how much the Bears, yes, had addressed the interior of the offensive line in free agency in the trade market, which is great. They trade for Joe Thuney, get him from the Chiefs, Jonah Jackson from the Rams, sign Drew Dahlman to play center from the Falcons, and you've got Darnell Wright already established on the right side. So what was easily the biggest flaw on this team's roster in the 2024 season was addressed several times. But that doesn't mean the work needed to stop. And I talked quite a bit about the need to add talent at left tackle, upgrade at left tackle. He had a number of people trying to sit there and say that they were good. Braxton Jones is just fine. No reason to have to draft his replacement. The Bears are perfectly happy with Braxton Jones and Kiran Amegadjie as their left tackle duo. And those folks are awfully quiet right now. Tell me how my ass tastes. Because the reality is even if you think Braxton Jones is good, he's not great. He's never going to be great, because if he was going to be great, you would have seen flashes of greatness by now. They're not there. And you are a year away from potentially staring down the barrel, if you didn't address the tackle position in the draft or in the offseason in any way, of potentially having to pay Braxton Jones $20 plus million a year to be an average left tackle in the NFL. And that's not an ideal way to build your roster. It's just not. So I personally, while I was thinking they might address it in round one and might have liked for them to address it in round one, they didn't do that. But the Bears did make sure they addressed that position in round two, or at least offensive tackle, right? And that brings us to Ozzy Trapilo, the offensive tackle from Boston College. Big dude, 6'8" and a quarter, 316 pounds, Boston College, 23 years old, lots of experience as a starter. This is a guy they clearly look at and say that we think he's got a starting future in the NFL, which I agree with. This feels like a situation where Ben Johnson looks at Darnell Wright and says maybe that's his version of Penei Sewell, and he's looking for his Taylor Decker in hopes that Ozzy Trapilo could be that Taylor Decker. So let's talk about Trapilo and let's see, where does he stack up? Were the Bears right to take him where they did later in round two? Was it a value? Was it a steal? Was it a reach? Was it a massive whiff? Well, we'll talk about that. But starting off here, what do I like about him, having watched him more closely over the past couple of days? He's got experience as a starter at both left tackle and right tackle. I know the last couple of years at Boston College, he just played right tackle, but he does have left tackle experience, so that is great. He's smooth getting to the second level on time and on balance. That's what I saw, at least. He can navigate through the muck and get to his assignment on the second level. He's got quick enough feet to get out wide for pull and trap blocks. So for a guy 6'8", his athleticism is pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. He's got a quick and effective kick step and back pedal. The one thing I didn't see a ton out of him in 2024 was him getting beat by kind of bendy edge rushers around the outside, and I was expecting like maybe that's going to be a flaw of his. That wasn't really a flaw of his. I'm not saying it never happened, but it was pretty rare. If anything, he got beat more by like inside counter and inside power moves than he did from guys just bending the edge and getting around him on the outside. His initial hand punch typically is well placed, keeps defenders out of his body, which I think is critical because he's got kind of average arm length, 33 to 33 and a half inches. Enough to play on the outside at tackle, but barely, right? You'd like his arms to be more in the 35-inch range, especially for a guy that's 6'8". He's got pretty good anchor and pass protection. Was surprised how good his pass sets were and how good his anchor was. Now, that doesn't mean that guys don't get up into him a little bit, due to his higher pad level, which we'll talk about in a moment. But still, this is a guy that when he gets set, he could be a challenge to move. And even if guys are pushing him back in terms of his upper body, he doesn't go back very far in terms of his feet. He plays with a mean streak too, and sometimes through the whistle, which you want to see out of your offensive lineman. You want them to have some attitude. You want them to be red asses. And Trapilo certainly feels like a red ass. He displays some solid instincts from what I saw in terms of his ability to pick up twists and stunts and late blitzes, knows his responsibilities generally speaking. A couple other things that really stood out. Extremely low penalty rate. I think he only had one or maybe it was even no penalties called on him in 2024. So really clean in that respect, which I think represents just how pro-ready of an offensive tackle prospect he is. And not only that, his pressure rate was really low, something like 3.6% or so the last two seasons, which if he was even close to that at the NFL level will make him an elite offensive tackle. And then he's got some NFL bloodlines. You heard about it during the draft, the story of his dad, former offensive guard with the New Orleans Saints, passed away many years ago when Ozzy was very young. But those bloodlines exist, right? So there's a lot there to watch about Ozzy and really like. In terms of the things you might say would be like question marks or concerns, I think there are a few. First is probably always going to be a challenge for him is that at 6'8" with kind of average arm length, he struggles with his pad level and leverage. And that's probably always going to be a battle for him to some degree. Now, there are things you can do from a technique standpoint, work on your knee bend, etc. But yeah, he's 6'8" with 33-inch arms. Pad level and leverage is always going to be a bit of a challenge for him in some respects. Now, I think he's done pretty well to work around that, but that doesn't mean that it won't get him in trouble at times, especially against power rushers on the edge at the NFL level. I think his hand punch, where I talked about, it's well placed. It keeps defenders out of his body. I feel like it could be more impactful, more forceful, if you will. He's a guy, when I watch him, it's like, yeah, he gets his hands on it, but he's not really moving people back. He's not pushing them off the spot. It's more like he's grabbing them and holding them. I don't mean holding as in holding penalties. You get what I'm saying, though, right? Like he's able to maintain versus drive, maintain versus pop. I would like to see his hand usage be more powerful, more violent. He sometimes struggles to redirect and reset his base on counter moves. I mentioned that a little bit. One of the sacks I saw was a counter move to the inside. That's going to be a little bit of a challenge for him. Again, 6'8", struggles with pad level and leverage, so sometimes he will struggle to redirect, reset that base. And then I think, and when you think about this in terms of a draft perspective, right? With that body type, he's likely limited to be an offensive tackle only. Not a ton of 6'8" guards, and certainly aren't many 6'8" centers in the NFL, right? So at that height, you're pretty much hoping and banking on the fact that he's either going to play right tackle or you're hoping he's going to play left tackle in the NFL for a long time, because if he doesn't make it there, you don't feel like you have the same level of versatility as you may with some other guys who are like maybe 6'5", 325, 330 pounds, where you say, well, they don't work out at tackle, we can move them inside to guard. You don't really feel like you have that same versatility here with Ozzy Trapilo. But kind of putting a bow on all of this, I will say I love the experience he comes with and his skill set. To me, one of the more pro-ready offensive tackles in this draft. Feels like he's going to be an 8 to 10 year starter at the NFL level, and probably a good one. I would imagine, I see the vision again, Ben Johnson looks at this guy and hopes he could become the Bears' Taylor Decker, and I certainly think there are some elements where he could. You know, the other thing I want to call out here, and there's going to be a lot of talk about it, and it's fair to talk about it, is the dynamic of, well, he played the last couple of years at right tackle at Boston College, and he was better at right tackle, so he's got to stay at right tackle at the NFL level. A couple of things I want to do to address this bullshit. Number one, the whole right tackle versus left tackle dynamic is really overrated in terms of the modern NFL. It really is. And, you know, depending upon the team and whether the top edge rusher is lining up over the right tackle or the left tackle, like, where do you want your better offensive tackle to be, right? Well, you want to default to the blind side, I guess, but that doesn't always mean they're going to be facing off the best guy. And these teams move these guys a lot on defense, so it just doesn't matter as much as it used to. Number two, this whole notion of he can only play right tackle. If you can play right tackle in the NFL today, you can play left tackle. Additionally, when you look at Ozzy and you want to say, well, when he switched to right tackle, he got better. What that seems to ignore is he was starting at left tackle back in like 2022. So he was like a 21-year-old kid at that point. Yeah, of course, naturally in his age 22 and age 23 seasons, playing a different position, he's naturally going to get better. So it's kind of a false comparison there, I would think, of saying, well, he was better at right tackle. That means he has to stick at right tackle the NFL. No, it doesn't. It means he probably would have been better at left tackle if he was allowed to stay there the next couple of years. He just wasn't. And that's it. And I think here's the biggest thing for him is even if you were like me and might have wanted offensive tackle in round 1, I could certainly live with Trapilo in round 2. Because this to me has a chance to be the best pick for the Bears from this respect. And you got to look bigger picture to see it and understand it. You're drafting him, let's say, to play left tackle long term. Even if he's only Braxton Jones level, that still makes this a great pick. Because I don't know about anybody else, but I would rather pay $1 or $2 million a year for a Braxton Jones level performance at left tackle than pay $20+ million a year. And if you're talking about Braxton coming into a contract year in 2025, and you say, hey, we'd hit the market and get some type of like big 4-year, $80 million deal with $60 million guaranteed. Let's just say that was the case. Not unreasonable to think that, even if he has a average season as a starter coming off the injury in 2025 here. Well, if he's just average and Trapilo's average for that same stretch of like, especially 2026 through 2028, would you rather be investing $20 million a year guaranteed into Braxton Jones, or maybe $1.5 million or $2 million a year into Ozzy Trapilo for similar level play? The answer is not that complicated. It's not that hard to me. I think Trapilo can play left tackle. If the Bears want to get cutesy and move Darnell Wright over to left tackle, I don't know how much of a fan of that I am at this point. I'm more of a fan of let Trapilo make that switch back to left tackle and give him some time there. But I really look at this pressure rate and I say that speaks to a guy that could be a decent, maybe upper half of the NFL type of left tackle. And that would be really good value for a late second round pick. In terms of NFL comparisons, yeah, it's probably some guy that played right tackle. I've seen plenty of Rob Havenstein comparisons. Also saw a little bit of Morgan Moses there, certainly. I think Taylor Decker's probably a bit of ways. I don't think he's at that level. But, after watching Ozzy, I thought he was like a solid, comfortable second-round pick. Probably, if I was looking at my big board, would be somewhere in like the low 40s. So for the Bears to get him late in round 2 was pretty good value, I thought. And it was a good example of this was one of the last, like, real offensive tackle talents that you felt could stick at tackle and start at tackle in the NFL level. So I like this pick, and I think this has the potential, when you think of the bigger picture, to easily become one of the best picks from this draft for the Chicago Bears.